Hi, I'm Dr. Jim Hoven, your host of the Difference Makers podcast. This is a place where people come together that are making a difference for those who want to make a difference. And that's you. We're bringing thought leaders together in a sense of fusion where ideas and concepts and personalities are all driven together into one place at one time. And this is no different. In this episode, you're going to see cool things from cool people making a difference. Hey everyone, welcome back. It is so great for me to be here with you on another show. Today, my guest is one of my best friends. I've known him for over 20 years. He and I go way back, and he, in a really important time in my life, was a coaching mentor and a business mentor, helping me in so many ways. And then we got to work together for a decade, and now we just get to bounce ideas off each other, both about business and philosophy and life. And it's just my biggest honor to have with me as a guest today, Mr. Brian Duggar. And a little bit, Brian, before you start talking, I got to say, you have one of the most amazing business minds that I've ever met. Now, at this point, a fairly long business career. Your business mind is really amazing, but where I've seen you grow so much is in the philosophical area. And that's why, as I was thinking something, I was doing some reading, and this concept of gratification came across in my reading. And I thought, man, I want to talk this through with someone. And there was no one that popped into my mind to talk about gratification, how it impacts our lives, both gratification in the moment, delayed gratification, all this business and personal, than you. So as an intro to this, I just want people to know your path and your past. I mean, ever since you were a young man, you were an entrepreneur, you had an antique shop, you owned buildings, you helped grow Health Source when you and I were there to 400 clinics in 8 years. And now you basically are the owner of Texas Health Chiro or Texas Chiro Health and Minnesota Chiro Health. So you're still in that, but even more than that, you're developing yourself. So can you just give us a quick intro on where you're at and kind of how you've progressed to this point in your life?
Holy cow. An intro on where I'm at and how I got to this point. All by accident, I guess, would be the three words that stand out, right? You never know where you're headed until you get there. The only thing I think for me, Jim, and I've talked to people about this because I do have, I still do a lot of, I guess coaching, mentoring, just however it comes into my life. When people ask me, they go, how did you find your way to success? How did you accumulate? They're looking at the houses, they look at the cars, they look at that thing. That's what that's what stands out to them. And the only thing I can really say is whenever an opportunity knocked, then I just went ahead and answered it. Right. And that was on every level. Right. I mean, even when I can think of, I would meet people that live halfway around the world and they're like, you should come visit sometime. And I'd be like, how about March? Right. I mean, I just went. Right. I just kept going all the time. And so it put me in some weird spaces because, my intro to chiropractic was really it was in meeting you with Chiropractic Elite Organization, which when you said that, I don't even know that that's an accurate representation in 20 years. It's been a long time. Right. But Chiropractic Elite Organization was a coaching group that was trying to collect this group of really successful chiropractors that are all $1 million docs making their $1 million a year back in the day. That's back when $1 million was really counting.
When it meant something.
If you buy something other than like a car. But the relationship that they had was with, at the time, my wife was their hotel sales rep. And I met the owners, and somehow that turned into an eventual relationship that was a coaching deal and ended up becoming, a operations guy at CEO, and then on to become president of CEO, and then off to do some clinics in Texas with John Randolph after I left CEO. And then you had called one day because there's an opportunity with Health Source, and you'd been talking with another guy we knew from CEO, and that's kind of how that got started. And so I just ended up in chiropractic, I guess, because the door knocked. At this point, I wouldn't really characterize myself as an owner of Minnesota Chiro Health and Texas Chiro Health. I'm a partner. I own shares in both. I'm more of a strategic guy, right? I am the strategy guy, but I don't have a day-to-day role. I don't have any role other than to try to help them find their way through it with the experience I've had in the field. And a lot of it for me is I tell them all the time, I'm sitting back and I'm watching and I'm thinking, and that can be from my house here or out at the lake house, or I was just up by you in Vail and hanging out. But I'm always just observing at this point and thinking. But I tell them, I guess if I had anything that I would equate who I am at this point in life, I'm like Don Quixote. I'm out there jabbing at windmills, trying to prove that there can be a structured and healthy business model for chiropractic specifically, because I've had so much experience in it. But I think it's really the same approach to life, which is, can we roll back time a little bit to before money was the only motivator, right? There was a great book that was written, or a really good book that was written, I won't say great, by called The Man Who Broke Capitalism. And it proffered some different theories. And I enjoyed a lot of it. There were a few things I disagree with, but it studied the culture that came with Jack Welch and GE, where they started inflating the profits, executives started making more money, and we got away from just the building a solid product and making money because you built something great. And I think it's the same with life. You have to really get focused on building something great and see how that plays out, because this shortcut to driving profit real fast so you can get your quarterly bonus and turning contracts that haven't been fulfilled, that can be played not only in business, but in life. Trying to speed it up, get that expensive car, that house, the relationship, whatever it is, speeding up the process, trying to meet an image instead of trying to figure out who you are through the slower building blocks of it. And I guess in my mind, I think that's what I'm really trying to do when I play a role in Texas Car Health and Minnesota Car Health, is I'm trying to slow it down and say, let's just build something that's really good, that helps a lot of people, and stay focused on that first, and not all the gimmicks that get thrown in front of us every day.
That is so good. And I think it's the perfect platform, Brian, to jump into this concept of gratification. You've mentioned it in several different ways that I think we can now take spins off into, which is number one, you were going through and you were answering the call, the knock, and it took you into opportunity. And then you also mentioned how now, you're at the point where you have multiple places where you can lay your head down at night, and you have the cars and the things that people look to, especially on social media today, right? Like everyone's showing their best lives and standing next to a jet, taking a picture saying it's their jet and all this craziness. So when we talk about instant gratification or instant celebration of life versus delayed gratification, I think based on the experience and the paths that you and I travel, we can have a really good conversation to maybe share with people to understand, or at least gain some insight to how they would like to live their life of, when is enough on one side, and on the other side, when is it okay for me to buy something, do something, take that trip? You know what I'm saying? Like that delayed gratification, save for tomorrow. Do this now so that you have a better body tomorrow and health tomorrow. Do this now so that you can have a better relationship tomorrow, versus I want what I want now to enjoy my life. That's really where I want to explore today.
Yeah, and I don't think they're as combative as a lot of people make them. You'll remember my railing against, Gary V's a little bit obnoxious approach when he first started, right? I'm like, shut up, I don't want to hear it right now, right? But I've come to appreciate Gary V because he has a belief system, which is the time is now, right? But for you to go, I think to go to France, if the idea, the desire is to go to France or to go to Belgium or whatever, I think that a lot of things when it comes to experiences, the time is always now. Don't delay it. Now, there's a difference between staying at the Ritz and staying in a hostel with a backpack. But I think that people need experiences to figure out who they are. And I think that there was a time where we were more experience focused and we've become more material focused. And I think that the material things, now that you need to get your focus off of, let that come as it comes, be more correct on it, and not be chasing just the Rolex watch and the Mercedes and all the toys that are out there so fast, right? But when you look at experiences, I think that's what we need to evolve ourselves. I've been at the lake house this past week. It was funny. On Saturday night, I had there's a guy that he's 20 years old and he's been helping me build a fire pit out there. I'll come up with different projects to just do myself, right? And I wanted to build this fire pit on that hill that overlooked the lake. And he came out and then got to know him a little bit, and he came around more often. And then he brought his brother, who's a meteorology student, broadcasting guy up at OU. And so there's this whole crew of people starting their life around my fire pit last Saturday night, right? And so we're just talking about those things. But the understanding of experiences, which I think is go, 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 now, is different, because that's what really shapes you. They're out chasing storms because they're into meteorology, and we had the eclipse, and so they were out there because we were on the center line for the eclipse, and you could see it really well out there, and it was totality. And so I think those kind of things, they're the things that really make us healthy and take us to a different plateau, more than just trying to buy something to look good, like you're talking about.
That's a great point. And you've known me a long time. Yeah, 20 years is definitely trying to make you and I both sound a little bit younger instead of 30. But that said, you've known me for a long time, and my nature has always been like, look, don't go too far on anything in spending money, because security is one of my core values, right? That, or my key, as you and I would say, our key values, my KV. Security has always been one. So I'm wired in the way of, you don't go too far on this side until A, you pay for it cash, or B, you got stuff to do. That's your reward down the line. And I've noticed that with, I'll say this, in taking what your statement was, and I think you said it so well, of chasing experience. One experience I will, I don't regret very, very, very little in my life, but I will say this: if I could tie an emotion of regret to something, it would be during my chiropractic practice years. I mean, you knew, man, I was a grinder 6 days a week, every single day, hundreds and hundreds of patients a week, and doing really well. When I went to Health Source and worked with you, when I started that career, I picked my kids up from school more the first week than I had the first 8 years combined, 10 years combined, whatever it was, how old they were. And so I lost a lot in that experiential time with my kids. And in one sense, that was really hard on me, but it was an eye-opening experience. And now what I hear you saying is the things that bring fulfillment, even if you don't know they bring fulfillment, like building the fire pit together, that's an experience. And then talking about it doesn't have to be to go into Belgium or France. How do you feel about the money side of that, paying for those experiences? It's something that you save up for and you don't enjoy the experience, or you make a lesser experience until you can afford that greater one?
I don't find it to be lesser, right? I mean, when you get into superlatives, you're already playing a game of the ego, right? Superlative of what's great and what's less than is already, a judgment call that's based on some perception. It's not on reality. I remember I was in Minnesota one time we were in Minneapolis at that museum. It's kind of that ultra modern museum, and it's called the Walker. And the Walker is like, well, you can relate this out there in Colorado when all of the grow houses started and the edibles started passing around. The Walker is like taking a handful of edibles and just walking through it, because it blows your mind. I mean, it puts you in this real trippy universe, right? And there was this one room, and when I went in, there was this video being played on this like 100-foot screen. And the video was of a corner, and I think it was in Lebanon in 1972. And the narrator is telling you, look at this traffic crossing, look at the cars that are moving, look at the apartment buildings around, look at the laundry that's being hung out. He's like telling you all these things that are in the video in front of you. Now realize, if you're watching this with someone else, they don't see the same thing you do. And if you were on that corner in 1972, standing right beside someone else, you would not have the same perspective. So I think the challenge of being is, how do we judge which one's greater and which one's lesser, right? What makes you money, what makes you successful, is knowing how to actually, and I didn't know this when I started. I mean, I was in the race as much as anybody, right? And so, but what makes you successful is that you begin to appreciate individual perspective, no matter how they get it, right? And then when everybody starts to have value, then that'll change the way you go about your life. And so I think that, the going to those experiences and appreciating them, right? Being in that be here now, as Ram Dass would always say, his coin phrase, right? Be present now, be here now. I think learning to be in that space is the key to experience. And then when opportunity knocks, you won't be in this frazzled state of trying to get. You'll be able to hear it, and you'll be able to walk through it. And maybe it'll take you 20 steps. Maybe it'll take you 20 years. You don't know. You just have to answer that door and see where it goes.
So when it comes to then on the gratification side, I think what I hear you saying that I'm trying to live in my own life is, if we are truly grateful in the moment that we're in, then the gratification of the moments becomes instant. We're getting instant gratification instead of waiting for some point in time to be happy and delaying that type of gratification. Would that be kind of a fair summary of what you're talking about?
I think there's fulfillment in the day to day. I mean, like I move so much slower now, right? And maybe it's age. I still like to do stuff, right? I mean, I'm like when you sent this last night, and I saw it, and then I thought, well, I'll reach out to him today. When you sent this, I thought, well, I was going to rock climb. Which would you rather do? And I'm like, okay, well then I'll push out that rock climb until tomorrow. Could use the recovery space anyways. But I look at different things like that, and I'm really slower now to analyze and just say, what do you want to do? What's the desired effect of what you're trying to make your next step on? But I didn't do that for the majority of my life, right? The majority of my life was go, 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 get. I just kept realizing I was running into the same walls. And so the last, really, I'd say the last couple of years, especially, there was foundation that you've known me through where I was building philosophy, but I was building philosophy out of frustration, right? I started chasing the philosophy of now, the philosophy of being more centered, because I was so off the edge on how much we were trying to produce. And then I was surrounded by so many other people chasing the same thing that I started thinking about who is teaching a way of more peacefulness, right? More serenity. That's how I got into the Wayne Dyer spaces. I think John Maxwell's literature gave a lot of good structure, but Dyer gave me a sense of peace. And then I started chasing like Carl Jung and Ram Dass and Alan Watts and all these different people that had a different approach to knowing about how to go to this life. And some of it just blew my mind. It was too far above my head, right? I mean, I'd have to listen to stuff 50, 60, 100 times, right? Just to be able to start to get the concept. But then I started realizing they've got a different understanding when they walk through the day than I do. And I want to figure that out.
And when we were going through these things together, it was interesting because we were a unique pairing, you and I, right? Like you were the hard charging guy and I was kind of your sidekick on how do we get this all done and how can I keep the relationships together that the wheels don't fall off the thing as we're trying to.
You mean the ones that Duggar's breaking on the inside? How do I pull that back? Hey, I didn't mean that. We'll keep it going. Yeah.
More or less. Yeah, more or less. And
much.
as we came into that, I would see the things that you had done. And this is where I think I want to take this is, how does the young mind interpret what now a more mature mind like yours and spending time in philosophy and spending time in yourself, what could we offer to these folks in their 20s and their 30s and even their 40s that would help shortcut that? Because when you and I were growing, we were such a great kind of a gas and brake pedal in what we did together that it really worked. But I would often wonder, again, I think part of this is our nature and our nurture from our wiring. I would sit there and go, you're out, doing this and that, and I'm doing this and that, and you're seeming to enjoy your time, but I enjoy working, but I feel guilty. I'm working so much. All this stuff of this, and this all ties back to gratification, I think, of me always looking to the distance for gratification, whether it be saving money and investing this, or in sometimes saying, I'm going to buy this now, and not a consumable thing, but an investment thing, because I want to hit a home run. So I'm going to go for it. I'm going to dump money in so that I was in instant gratification mode instead of letting the process work, knowing my time horizon was long. I'm like, no, I need to get ahead. I need to be doing like what Brian can do and have this second house and do this and do that. There was a thing that I watched you that I struggled with, and you always were there supporting me to be like, hey man, I need to do a little bit more like what you're doing. And then you could use a little bit more like what I'm doing. And there was a thing that helped me grow. What could we take from all of this to pass down to the generation below us?
Well, I mean, I think first of all, I mean, I always had and I grew up learning, right? And my environment taught me how to accomplish, right? How to, strategize your way through things and find your way from what we classify as a business nature, right? A business perspective. So I knew how to make the sale, get the job done, take the path that would pay off or be rewarding, right? So I know that was my nature. Yours was more into the relationships and doing those things, but you also were always looking for that new cool thing to try to hit, right? And so even in practice with patients, I mean, God, look at the list of things you got. You were first on the decompression deal when they had those machines up there, and then balance and fall, and I mean, you got all the toys, right? But every one of those toys came with a price tag. Whereas I'm sitting back going, why do we need that to do chiropractic? Why do we need that? Why do I need to spend that money? So I was playing a different game that was all off of profit margin, right? So I was managing profit margin. You were looking for whatever the next thing was that we could actually really do something with, right? But I wouldn't be able to sit here now, which is my favorite space in my life. I wouldn't be able to sit here now if I wouldn't have had the relationship that I had with you going through that, and you say putting on the brakes from where I'd gone off the cliff or speeding things up, right? It was that interplay because I trusted you and your friendship enough that it gave me the ability to just go hard, know you had my back, and then come back and honestly listen to your perspective. And how often did we have those conversations, right? I mean, during the course of a day for years working together, it was like, multiple times a day. What about this? What about that? What about this? What about that? So I learned that to have those relationships and to have your perspective was something that I really appreciated. And so I needed to play my life, not just based off of what my natural talents were and amplify those, but also to figure out how to overcome my weaknesses, my hangups, right? And that's where stability really comes from. Everybody wants it now. You want all the things that come with it. What makes my life easy right now, right? I guess easy compared to when you look at the things of houses and finances and things like that, what makes it easy is I was willing to not just go with the talents I had, but to also tackle the weaknesses. And they're a lot harder. They're a lot harder to get out because they were rooted in, they were programmed. I think program is the right word that I use a lot when I'm talking to our teams. Is they were programmed in me by really bad programmers. Your parents, your grandparents, the people you grew up around did not mean to screw you up as much as they did. They just weren't that great at programming. And so your job is to take what you got from them that was good and amplify it. But then you're going to have to look at the other side too. And it doesn't matter how much you love them, respect them, appreciate them, or despise them. It doesn't matter where it comes from. What matters is once you hit 18, it's your job now. Get started, right? And so, we can give blame and carry it. And I see a lot of people that fight a lot of real solid blames that they can go back to parents or people that hurt them when they were younger. But the truth is, when you get to the point of reckoning, right? When you get to an age of reckoning, it's no longer on them. It's on you. And I'm sorry you had that, but do something different, right? Just go chase something different. And that's a real hard line, but it's the one I applied to myself because I had a lot of those same hard experiences growing up. And that's where I live, is I just got to go figure it out. And I think that's why I was so invested on answer the doors that knock. And then it's going to put you in some deep water. And I have been in deep water many more times than I can begin to imagine. But the way I found my way to the top was by just learning to tread, to swim, to fight, and to look for life rafts that others threw me, right? And that was a long space. But I've never had as much enjoyment as I have right now in my day-to-day life, ever.
And are you passing certain messages? Because I know one of your biggest joys in life is mentoring, whether it's these folks in the chiropractic clinics that you are part of and partner in. And most of those guys and gals at this point are younger than us, right? In their career path, but it's also people outside of your business, that friends that you have.
All of those guys, most of them.
I was trying to, kind of give us some latitude there, buddy. Our birthdays are only a handful of days apart. So, what applies to you applies to me. So,
Yeah, okay.
But anyway, you really enjoy also spending time with people outside of your workplace and that really want to grow. Do you, in regards to this, tying it to this gratification thing, do you tell them that, hey, you're going to have to go through your own pathway of going through, like you said, the deep water, answering the opportunity knocks, do all that? Or is there, quote unquote, a hack or a shortcut to say, find your peace, find your joy, get that instant gratification from that side while you're saving money and while you're doing the other things? Have you found that, or are you just letting people kind of take their own path?
I think there's all these different ways to come about, but I think that you have to look at the individual. Eric, I have a couple of guys I just met recently that I was thinking about this, what book to give them, right? And they're both, year apart or whatever, 2 years apart. And I was thinking about what book or what advice. And one person, the thought that came to my mind was Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. Because he's just after it, after it, after it. If he has an opportunity to work or make money, he's after it, right? He's not stopping. And so he's going to have to answer that call first. He can't answer the other call first. But the other person, when I was thinking about him and where he is in his nature in life, even though they're in similar spaces, beginning, he's got this quest of trying to understand, I think, himself, and it's they're new relationships, so I don't know them well, but I saw a depth that he's searching for, and that made me think of Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, right? Because perspective is what's going to lead him, I think, first. But in the end, the second guy is going to need the first book, and the first guy is going to need the second book. And I think that's the challenge: is have you really sat down and taken an inventory of your strengths and your weaknesses and what you're after and why you're after, right? What are your motivations? And a lot of it is for that Instagram. I mean, there's so much that's tied. One of the things I love about this is when I see people that are 20 and 21 and 22 and they're defeating the used to be called millennial, but it's not even that anymore, right? But they're defeating the tag that's been placed on so much. They're like, they don't want to work anymore. You're all these old people talking about they don't want to work anymore. They don't have the same work ethics. No, they're just different. They're different, and they're going to have to go about it a different way. And I don't know that the rules or not the rules, the truths. I don't know that the truths ever change. I know they don't, as a matter of fact. But there's some people, whether it be a teacher like a John Maxwell versus a Wayne Dyer, you have to have both teachers. It's just which one's first. And I think that's what it comes down to, is really knowing yourself. And you can do that in a couple of ways by trying to just ask the questions in a quiet room, but then also asking people that you can trust enough, people that have your back, like you and I had each other's back, to just tell the honest truth. And then it didn't matter what you said. What mattered was what I chose to do with it, and whether I bought into it or I didn't, and vice versa, right? And so you're going to have to learn to open up. And that's, I think, the real problem. I think if you're looking at any real issue, the real issue is transparency. There's so much of a plastic ego game being played that nobody's getting into transparency. And if you don't get the transparency, you're not going to find success. There's no chance. You may get lucky and sell a gadget for $1 million, but that million will disappear, I promise. I can't begin to count how many millions have gone through my hands, right? What I have touched and influenced and been able to affect, and how much has gone through my hands. But the reality was that if you give if I give a basketball to a really lousy basketball player, well, it's not going to go any far. But if you put it into we can choose to fulfill the name of the greatest one in here, but I mean, I'll choose Jordan still, despite the controversies that are out there. If you put a basketball in the hand of Jordan, it comes to a whole different ballgame. But Jordan learned one thing, as much as if you study his life, one thing he learned that I still love is he said, and I'll never forget it, and I say it all the time. He said, the key to success is simple. I have failed over and over and over again, and that is why I succeed. He outlined how many shots he had missed, how many times he'd taken the game-winning shot and blew it. He outlined all of his troubles, and then in that quote, if you look for Michael Jordan's quote on failure online, you'll find it. But the summation was, I fail, and that is why I succeed, because I'm not afraid to go try. I'm not afraid to answer the door.
And I think that's a big part of gratification that didn't hit my brain until right now, as you were saying that. Whether it's delayed gratification or instant gratification, failure, and I'll put air quotes up here, is something that makes us have a certain feeling, and we interpret that feeling, right? We internalize it, whether that's a negative feeling or as Maxwell would say, a failing forward, or, when you're failing, you're growing or you're learning, these kinds of things. So how we put that, imagine if people looked at when they failed as, hey, that's a win. That's an instant win for me in how I don't do it next time, how I proceed next time. And it helps me also know, how do I use my resources of time, energy, and money? How do I use those so that I'm healthy now and later? Because one of the biggest things I've ever learned is compound interest does not just apply in finances. Compound interest, you gain compound interest from every workout that we do. If you don't like it, fine, you don't have to like it. But if you don't do it, you will get the compound interest of not doing it 20 years from now versus if you do. Same thing with your money investing, same thing with your diet. You and I know I love to train and I love to eat, and the eating is the harder part for me. And I have I have had to deal with the compound interest of decades of choices that I love pizza, I love burgers, I love, whatever. And so understanding the gratification, being in the moment and saying, I choose this because I'll own the repercussions. I think that's a big part of gratification relating to failure and to adjustment and to self-awareness, as you referred to a minute ago.
Yeah, I know I think when you're looking at like the younger culture, Jim, and you're thinking about, there's so many messages to chase this, chase that, chase this, chase that. How do you give an understanding of be present? Is that kind of what you're driving towards a little bit?
Right.
And yet I look back at it, and as crazy as, do you remember the first cell phone that we were tempted by? Do you remember what it looked like?
Oh
It's like
yeah.
this
Like a
all
brick.
had, and it had an antenna that was twice as long, right? I mean, and we thought, oh, how cool is that, right? How cool! You see that phone, dude? That guy's got one of those phones, right? So it's always been like that. It always has. And if we go back to you've heard me quote this a million times, but the letters from a merchant to his son. It was that compilation of letters that was written back around 1900 from the editor of the Saturday Evening Post. And I remember the one line that this rich, wealthy man who owned a meat company in the stockyards of Chicago, he had written a letter to his son at Harvard, and he said this. He said, "I can't have your advantages, and you don't have mine." His son grew up in a wealthy household that had a different perspective, and he would never be able to understand what his dad went through. And the dad will never understand what the son went through, vice versa, right? And so what he was telling him is it doesn't matter how you learn, just get out there and learn. I learned one way, and he talked about it could be from having a great Sunday school teacher or a cussed, drunken father, right? It doesn't matter how you learn, just learn. And I think that's what it all comes back to is peace of life comes from you learning that each and every circumstance is really what's mattering to this whole fabric, right? The fabric that we're living and what we get from, if we want peace, if we want to have enjoyment in this life, it won't come through money. Money can be with it, but peace comes from you realizing that you're living in each moment and taking advantage of it, and then learning how to help others do the same thing. And so you're only going to get that through greater experience. And so I always feel bad for people, especially like the small town people, when I'm in a small town and hanging out there and I feel like, do they know what it's like outside of this? But then I'm like, but do I know what it's like inside of this? Right. I mean, like it goes back and forth all the time. And when you get to where you're really confused, you might be getting there.
Well, I'm always confused, so I must be getting there faster than most people. So I want to drill down just a little bit more, Brian, what you were just talking about with respect to what I'm going to coin as self-awareness. So when you said, knowing about kind of what works for you and how we're going to move it to a small town versus a big town, knowing what kind of people to study, what directions to take. I think self-awareness is so crucial for all of us, and we're wired a certain way. I know I've used that term a few times during our time together, but we are nature and nurture, and this wiring, I think, it really is worth it to pay attention to and spend time who you are and compare that to who you want to be. And so if I want to be someone, for example, if I wanted to be a really big mover and shaker, it's not in my natural state of things. So if I want to do that, I'm probably only going to take that so far, but I'm going to have to get a mentor around that to help me do that versus just really drive in the relationship side and be a great wingman and a great partner, right? That's where I really thrive. And it makes me ask you this. You and I have been around a lot of personality profiles that we've done, that we've administered to the people that have entrusted us with their livelihood and their welfare. What part do you think, or what tools do you think we all can use to get that self-awareness, to know that, hey, I'm built for security, so I'm going to start saving more money so that I'm going to feel good about that, because it's all about emotions and feelings anyways, right? And versus saying, hey, I'm wired to go to battle, man. That's what I do, and that's where I'm in my happy space. How do you feel about personality profiles, self-exploration, diving into that study?
I think doing the profiles are great, but I think they're just scratching the surface, right? I think everyone should do a personality profile and buy the cheaper ones because they're just as valid as the, I mean, a $3,000 profile does not give me any more insight than a $28 profile. That's the truth, right? I mean, I've done them all and played with all of them for thousands of times, right? And I know they can argue their products, and I get it, but when I look at it, the base understanding of who you are as a personality breaks into a few categories, and you start to get to know yourself. And I think that that's worth doing. I think that the part about going out and you're wired to get security before you take risk kind of thing, right? I don't think they're exclusive. I think they go together. I think that security comes from risk, and I think that those that are wired for security are going to have to step onto the other side of the playing field. And I think those that are wired for risk better realize how to build security on the other side of the playing field, right? And I was fortunate enough to see like my parents, I'm the beginning of what is, and you are too, what I think is the really strong divorce culture in the United States, right? I mean, now it's a 53% loss on first marriages and 76% on second marriages, right? But we were the beginning, like growing up in it, right? And when it happened, it was a newer thing. It was unusual to hear of divorced parents back then, right? But I think that by watching my parents do their search in life, and my dad's out there hitting it with not as much regard for security, right? And then I see my mom being more risk averse and trying to just earn each and every paycheck and get the next new sofa she wants or whatever. And I was able to sit back and watch this movie play out in front of me. And I was aware enough to some level that I retained the info. So then when I started really looking at my life, I started going, I see what he's doing, but I also see the risk that comes with it. And I'm going to have a little bit more security than he has. And I see the safety play that comes from this side of my family, my mother, my grandparents, and I'm going, I need more experience than that, right? I don't want that. So for me, I was able to look at both sides, and I just wrote my own book, and I went a little bit different. And so, yes, I went after things, but then I also saved, and I went after things and I saved. And I was lucky enough. I remember my first stock investment was the tech burst that happened right before 2000 or somewhere in there, right? The tech burst, and I was, I put down $3,000 being the savvy investor I was in this new tech market that's blowing up, and I lost every freaking penny of of it real quick, right? And I battled it back for years. I mean, it was like a decade before I think I even came close to breaking back out of it, right? And I went, that's not for me. And I started thinking, what am I going to invest in? And I invested in me. I went back, and if I could have an influence on something, if I could have a hand in it, then that's the investment I wanted. I wanted the most risk averse and risky at the same time, which was me, who I was. I wanted to be invested into what can I do with my actual time, energy, and money to keep expanding. And that's what I went after. And so I went down that road, but I wasn't interested in the get rich quick thing. I wasn't wanting to spend much money on a big deal. I was collecting money on one side, but I'm out there searching for it on the other. But I think I got that perspective from watching two people going about this, or two sides of my family going about it different ways. And I think that gave me a unique perspective that I actually remembered.
And what about business? As we kind of start bringing this in different circles a little bit here, when it comes to a business, there's, and we could call it even a business of a family, the business of something producing something, a business like what you and I are in. How do we rationalize our delayed gratification versus our immediate gratification? That, like, should we take all the money in a business and dump it into the business to keep it growing and not look to take much money out? These kinds of things apply outside of business, but I think it'd be great if you would just talk about that for a moment on building for now versus building for later.
I think when you're starting a business, first of all, I think a business should pay you right out of the gate, right? And I understand the difficulty and what's taught in business courses, right? Where you're like, well, that first year, 2 years, you cannot be taking any money from the business. So I guess I look at it and go, we know that a business is either developing a product or a service. And a product is, and it can be considered both, but I'm saying an actual tangible product or service, right? And so when the product is developed, I can realize how we might have to invest for the product before we start to see a yield. But if I'm 6 months in and that product isn't selling enough that it's bringing some money back to be able to reward to some level, right? Not to a high level, because I shouldn't be living at a high level when I'm starting a business. I should be down here. And Kiyosaki did a great job of teaching that in Rich Dad Poor Dad, right? I mean, there's a lot of things, again, all these different authors, you can have things you definitely agree with and things that maybe not so much. But one of the things that Kiyosaki said is quit living so large out there. Buy more that's going to produce more for you. So he was about put it into real estate and let the real estate yield and live off of the yields. But that way your capital is secured in real estate somewhere, right? But I think it's the same with a business when you're doing it. If I haven't started getting somebody buying my product and I can't see in my pro forma, then I go, in month one, I'm expecting this many to be sold. In month two, I'm expecting this many. And I see it escalating 3, 4, 5, 6. If that's not happening, I better examine that product and either change it or make a new plan, right? And I think the same goes for service. And so service is easier to get to. And in the service industry, you can make cash really quickly. But the challenge of the main is, you were in the service industry when you started as a chiropractor and you worked your butt off. I'll never, ever in my life forget the amount of reports that you'd have stacked up on your desk while you're listening to sports radio and trying to get all those things churned out. But
So true.
yeah, but you were making your bank. But then again, y'all were looking for an easier way. You wanted more freedom because you were so tied to it, like you say, not picking up the kids. Actually, I picked this quote. I keep this on my desk, and this was from Jim Morrison. But he said the most important kind of freedom is to be what you really are. You trade in your reality for a role. You trade in your sense for an act. You give up your ability to feel and in exchange put on a mask. There can't be any large-scale revolution until there's a personal revolution on an individual level. It's got to happen inside first. And I think that is the key to making a business work, is it's a personal thing that you're battling in the fears. So keep yourself in the backpack before you go stay at the Ritz, right? Stay at that lean space to travel across Europe and backpack when you're 18, 19 years old, right? Get those experiences, but you ain't gonna live large. You can do it cheap. And that's part of what I think is true when it's starting a business and building it, is stay lean and know that what you're really working on is what's in you. And that's what's going to make the product take off or the service take off. And everything that's holding the product or service back, that's what's in you too. And you've got to work on that. So it's always an internal battle. Those are just the external results. But if you get this right, that'll come. I guarantee it. I've watched it over and over. I've coached people over and over through it. And that's still what I'm teaching. And even right now in chiropractic, like part of my battle is driven, my search. It's really not a struggle for me right now. It's just it's something I'm after. But part of it is motivated by what you went through, right? Watching so many doctors that I coached that were trapped without what they perceived as freedom to enjoy their life. But what they didn't do was they didn't have a way to learn and then give it away. They collected knowledge, they administered to patients. But the biggest part of really expanding yourself is going to be when you're teaching it. So yes, teaching patients, but who else are you teaching, right? And that system, I think, for a clean model of chiropractic, not to go down the road of all the little toys and different holistic possibility corners you could get into, right? I think it really comes back to keep the struggle alive, keep that struggle real, because it's not external, it's internal where it's happening.
And I think to end on this, Bri, would be amazing. You mentioned the word struggle. And when I was going through different times in my life, I had to decide, what did I want to do? What did I want to take on? And that word that you use, struggle, I made a conscious choice of mine that if it's something I'm intending to do, I'm going to grapple with it. Because grapple implies, to me, a sport like wrestling, and we're going to get after it. And I have an intention in mind, and it's not a negative thing, it's a positive thing. And I think what I would like you to finish on is grappling with finding the right balance. What are some tools that you would recommend if we're going to grapple with, to find this definition of gratification? Because I think what we've done a really good job of today, especially from your perspective or from your side of things of the conversation, has been saying there's no right way. There's only your way, and you're going to know if it's right. I remember you always telling me this: hey man, we're going to go down a path here and you're going to make a decision. It's why time in the path. You got to go left or right. And you're going to take that. And then even if it was the wrong decision at the time, you're going to come to another path. and you're going to have to take right or left. And eventually as long as you keep doing the best that you can and you're coming from a good space, you're going to end up where you want, but the path may go circuitous versus straight. And that's okay. And I think when it comes to gratification, if we could find some tools or some processes that you would now recommend to say, if you want to know what gratifies you, you got to know who you are and you got to grapple or struggle with some things. What would be your recommendation as we kind of wind this up for folks listening to find that center of themselves, to live like the way you and I are living right now and feeling the way that we feel in our lives?
I used to battle with, or I used to not be aware and then battle with the word integrity. Because the word integrity is used so often as a moral standard. And yet I could have an integrity or an integrousness to me and be a really not good person, not moral person. But if what I say and what I do are connected and they're in alignment, well, then I could be filled with integrity to accomplish that goal that way, right? I think that what we have to have is a strong moral compass. And that moral compass is in that product or in that service or in that life or in those relationships. You're looking to be a better human today than you were yesterday. You're looking to serve others today better than you did yesterday. And that's the tough part, because what if I'm not equipped to be a better human? What if I'm not equipped to serve others better? And the truth is we aren't, but we stay after it. And when you can fill your life with integrity of doing that moral compass search, right? When you're going down that line, then the things you put your hand to, they're going to fail and they're going to succeed, but you keep watching them and understanding them. But you've got to make that call. I think the challenges, and I mentioned earlier, programmers, we've been brainwashed by our environment and our programmers into our current state of mind. That's okay. I remember thinking about, I had an uncle that passed away a few years ago. And he had sepsis. He had entered into sepsis, and in the last ditch efforts to save his life, they did what they always do. They did a blood transfusion, right? Because his blood was tainted, his liver wasn't cleaning it. We're going to give him a fresh blood supply, and that way it will give him, fresh life from somebody else's supply. And they were able to sustain his life for a while. But the sepsis that was being created by his body was so strong that he finally succumbed and passed away to that sepsis, right? I think it's the same with our thoughts. What we need when we have the thoughts that we currently possess and we're searching out that moral compass to be better and to do better and to work hard at it, we're going to need a thought infusion, right? We're going to need a thought transfusion. And I may not be equipped for it. So who are your teachers? Who are you listening to most often, right? Who is it that you're seeking out advice from most often? Is it more people trying to get a picture on Instagram? Is it more people trying to get in front of that fake plane in a studio somewhere and make it look like they're on a private jet? Or are you seeking out the people that have already been tested and tried, right? I mean, I could give you a list of it. I maintain, you remember when we created the steps, the 6 different audio collections that we did for all the masterminds that we were running? I still maintain those. And everybody that works in our offices, that's where I start them, right? Is get in there and listen to Wayne Dyer's Excuses Be Gone, the PBS lecture, which is hard to find, but that one, and then also the other one is the How to Get What You Really, 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 Really Want, the 4 reallys, right? How to have your focus of mind between Deepak Chopra and Wayne Dyer. When I start looking at those thoughts, they change my life. Whenever I listen to Ram Dass and his stuff, and it's a little bit more advanced, right? I mean, you got to get somewhere first. One of my favorites that I play all the time. I don't know. Do you listen to "Living the Wisdom of the Tao" by Dyer? Have you listened to that piece?
Yeah, it's good.
That piece it's in my car all the time, because just playing it for 10 minutes. I mean, I've listened to Excuses Be Gone, that lecture. I lost count over 1,000, 7.5 hours, and I lost count over 1,000 times. But what I knew was that the thoughts that I possessed from the programmers and the environment that I received were only going to take me so far. And I figured that out early on. So I needed fresh thought. I needed a transfusion of ideas and thoughts. And I had to think carefully about where I wanted to get them. And I made lots of wrong choices, and I paid the effect. And people who knew me and loved me or had relationships with me, they paid the effect at times too. But my life is about me searching out how to stay on that compass over and over again. And if you can get that higher perspective and you can get yourself committed to learning from people that have already had proven paths, right? Then you'll find that the truth is the truth. And it doesn't matter whether Maxwell taught it or Rohn taught it or Brian Tracy taught it or Doss or Chopra or Alan Watts. They're all teaching us the same thing. They're just saying it different ways. And if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at will change. Right. And that's what it comes down to, is having the right perspective when you're out there seeking out your life.
Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. As always, brother, I can't thank you enough for taking the time and, being with me versus rock climbing. I probably would have chosen rock climbing. So the fact that you put me and our audience here at the Ramos Law Difference Makers podcast, dude, I can't thank you enough. And this has been just such a wonderful, enriching experience for me, sets me back on my right path. And I hope it was a good use of time for you as well. So thanks for coming in. And for those of you that are watching or listening to this, please leave us a 5-star review, because this was 5-star information. And also share it with someone. This doesn't go out on its own. This needs to get into the world through people like you that care, that hear it, and that wants what's best, not only for you, but for someone else. So if you would do that for me, it would mean the world. If you would please subscribe, follow us on our channels. You guys know how to do all that stuff way better than I do. But I just want to thank you for tuning in. Brian, thank you so much. And until the next time we all get together, please just get out there and keep making a difference.
Thanks, buddy. I appreciate you, man.